A good set of kitchen knives can last an entire lifetime, so the question is this $20 set of knives just as good as a set that costs $250? Well, let's find out. At a price of only $20, the least expensive brand we'll be testing is made by Farberware. They claim the knives are made from superior high-carbon stainless steel. The set includes 14 knives, some scissors, and some utensils. They claim the knife set will never need sharpened. We're going to test that. The Farberware knives are made in China. It even includes some scissors. Let's compare the paring knives from each knife set first. The weight of a knife can sometimes be an indicator of quality. The Farberware paring knife weighs 38 grams. They are supposed to be very sharp, so let's test the sharpness of the knives. Unfortunately, the Farberware knife doesn't appear to be very sharp, but there's a better way to test this. To test the initial sharpness of the knives, I'll be using this Best Certified Knife Sharpness Tester. The tester came with this chart. A double-edged razor blade has a sharpness between 50 and 75. A utility blade is between 150 and 200. High-end cutlery edges are between 250 and 350. Edges that need maintenance are 400 and up. A butter knife is really dull at around 2,000. The tester uses these disposable test clips. The tester measures the downward force it takes to cut through the test media. The test clip can only be used one time. And Farberware claims that their knives never need to be sharpened, but this brand new paring knife is pretty dull with a sharpness score of 400. At a price of $40 is this Astercook brand. It's a 15-piece knife set which works out to $2.67 per knife. They claim that the knife set is dishwasher safe, made in China, and it's 42 grams for the Astercook. And a close look under the microscope and the blade edge looks pretty sharp. And 170 is indeed a pretty sharp knife edge. Also at a price of $40, the same price as the Astercook, is this Hunter.Dual brand. They claim the knives are made of German high-carbon stainless steel. The knives are supposed to be non-stick and rust-resistant, making them dishwasher safe. It's a 15-piece knife set with a block self-sharpening, made in China. The Hunter.Dual weighs 46 grams. And the Hunter.Dual also looks pretty sharp. However, the Hunter.Dual isn't quite as sharp as the Astercook with a sharpness score of 235. At a price of $49 is this Stewart brand. It's a 14-piece high-carbon stainless steel knife set. The knives do require that you hand wash them to avoid corrosion. Forged stainless steel knives with full tang construction for balance and durability. Made in China. And it's 63 grams for the Stewart. And the Stewart also has a pretty nice looking knife edge. And the Stewart knife moves into second place behind the Astercook with a sharpness score of 175. At a price of $56 is this McCook knife set. It's a 15-piece German forged stainless steel set. The knives are not designed for use in a dishwasher, they have to be hand washed. Made in China. The McCook paring knife weighs 55 grams. And the McCook blade edge appears to have a less aggressive sharpening angle than the Stewart. And a sharpness score of 235 trails the Astercook by 65 sharpness points. At a price of $65 is this Cuisinart 15-piece set. They claim their classic forged triple rivet knives possess superior high-carbon stainless steel. Comes with a limited lifetime warranty. Made in China. And it's 78 grams for the Cuisinart. The Cuisinart also looks pretty sharp, and the Cuisinart performed well with a sharpness score of 200. At a price of $96 is this Wizeka set. They claim their knives are made of food-grade German stainless steel. They claim their knives are ultra-sharp with a 15-degree hand-polished edge. Knives are dishwasher safe to avoid rusting. The Wizeka is made in China. The Wizeka weighs 95 grams. And the Wizeka looks extremely sharp. And the Wizeka moves into the lead with a sharpness score of 140. Very impressive. At a price of $110 is this Henchels brand. They claim these knives are German engineered. These knives are supposed to be ultra-sharp. They claim that these are the last knives you'll ever buy. The knife set is supposed to be dishwasher safe, but hand washing is recommended. The Henchels is made in China. And it's 97 grams for the Henchels. The Henchels also looks extremely sharp, and the Henchels moves into second place behind the Wizeka with a sharpness score of 150. At a price of $130 is this Imarku 16-piece knife set. With an angle of 13 to 15 degrees, their blades are supposed to be razor sharp. The high-carbon stainless steel is supposed to offer unparalleled strength and resistance to rust. They claim it's a Japanese knife set, but it's made in China. The Imarku weighs 74 grams. Imarku claims their knives are razor sharp, and the Imarku paring knife is 100 sharpness points duller than the sharpest knife at 240. At a price of $156 for just 6 pieces is this ZWILLING brand. ZWILLING claims that their knives are dishwasher safe. The knives are sharpened to 15 degrees, ensuring a very sharp edge. ZWILLING claims that they know more about knives than anyone else in the world. Compared to the other brands, they claim that their knives stay sharp longer. The ZWILLING is made in Germany, and the ZWILLING weighs 48 grams. The ZWILLING is sharpened to a 15-degree angle, and it's the third sharpest knife so far with a sharpness score of 165. At a price of $200 is this Global Osaka 6-piece bamboo knife block set. They claim that their knives are handcrafted. Ice-tempered, Rockwell hardness of 56 to 58. Holds a unique razor-sharp convex edge longer. The knives have 10 to 15 degree double bevel blade edges. Hand washed with gentle dish soap and then dry. The Global knives are made in Japan, and it's 65 grams for the Global. And the blade edge looks pretty sharp, and the Global performed well with a sharpness score of 180. At a price of $250, the most expensive knife set we'll be testing is made by Yatoshi. They claim these knives are made of high carbon steel that provides a razor-sharp, professional quality blade. They claim a Rockwell hardness of 57 to 58. The knives are integrated with a soft and comfortable handle. The Yatoshi knife set is made in Japan. The Yatoshi weighs 83 grams. And Yatoshi claims that their knives are razor sharp, and a sharpness score of 210 isn't nearly as sharp as some of the other brands. So the pairing knife with the sharpest factory blade edge is the Wizeka with a sharpness score of 140. The Henchels is almost as sharp with a score of 150 and ZWILLING 165. Blade edge retention is a huge factor to consider. So let's go ahead and run the knives across this piece of Osage orange. This is a very hard piece of wood which has a Janka score of around 2,500. I'll add 10 pounds to the top of the knife, and let's run the knife across the Osage orange 100 times. Now that's a pretty good workout, so let's see how the Farberware held up. And the new knife edge on the Farberware started out at 400 and now it's at 440, a loss of 40 sharpness points. And the Astercook started off very sharp at 170, but the blade has really dulled quite a bit at 240. The Hunter.Dual started off duller than average and lost a lot of sharpness at 305. Martha Stewart started off as one of the sharpest knives and it only lost 20 sharpness points, dropping to 195. Just like the Hunter.Dual, the McCook started off at 235 and the McCook lost a lot of sharpness at 315. And the Cuisinart started off at 200 and it only lost 25 sharpness points at 225. And the Wizeka started off as the sharpest knife and only dropped 10 points to 150, which is pretty good. And the Henchels started off at 150 and only lost 5 sharpness points to 155. And the Imarku started off at 240 and it lost 20 sharpness points, dropping to 260. And the German-made ZWILLING was one of the sharpest knives and it held up really well at 180 after 100 passes across the Osage orange. The Global started off pretty sharp at 180 and the knife is still performing as new at 180. Very impressive. And the Yatoshi scored 210 on the sharpness test when it was new and lost quite a bit of sharpness at 255. Extremely sharp knives are more subject to blade edge roll and damage, but the Global still came out on top without experiencing any sharpness loss. The Henchels finished in second place with a 3% loss in sharpness, and Wizeka finished in third at 7%. Another perspective of knife sharpness is that the Wizeka is still the sharpest knife with a sharpness score of 150. Henchels is at 155 and ZWILLING and Global are at 180. It doesn't take long before knives need to be sharpened. So I'll go ahead and spend the next 4 hours sharpening all of the knives, putting on a much sharper edge on all the knives compared to when they were new. I'll first use a marker on the blade edge so that I can see the progress. I'll then use the 100 grit diamond stone on one side of the blade until a burr is formed on the opposite side of the blade. Under a microscope, you can see the burr that has formed on the knife edge. I'll go ahead and repeat this process on the opposite side of the blade until a burr is formed. Now that we have a 15-degree angle on both sides of the knife, let's go ahead and properly sharpen the knife. I'll go ahead and apply 15 alternating back and forth passes with 200, 400, and 600 grit stones. Now let's go ahead and apply 25 passes using 800 grit stones and 40 passes using 1000 grit stones. Sharpening with just stones leaves an imperfect knife edge. I didn't sharpen the Farberware since it's not designed to be sharpened. It's incredibly important to use a leather strop to clean up the newly sharpened knife edge. And the Astercook started off with a sharpness score of 170 when it was new, but it quickly dulled to 240. And the Astercook now has a sharpness of 115, which is way sharper than any of the knives when they were new. And the Hunter.Dual started off relatively dull at 235 when it was new, and now it's at 110, the sharpest yet. And the Martha Stewart's knife blade material is actually of decent quality. The Martha Stewart blade is now at 110. And the McCook knife blade material doesn't seem to be nearly as good as the Martha Stewart, but it's very sharp at 115. And the Cuisinart knife had a sharpness score of 200 when it was new, and now it's extremely sharp at 110. The Wizeka was the sharpest in the lineup at 140 when it was new, and now it's even sharper at 115. And the Henchels had a new knife edge sharpness of 150, but now it's just as sharp as the Wizeka at 115. The Imarku was relatively dull at 240 when it was new, and now it's very sharp at 115. And the ZWILLING was pretty sharp at 165 when it was new, and now it's just as sharp as the other knives at 115. And the Global did the best job of holding a sharp edge at 180, and now it's even sharper at 115. When the Yatoshi was new, it definitely wasn't razor sharp at 210. Now it's just as sharp as a utility blade at 115. Now that I've sharpened all of the knives within 5 sharpness points of each other, I'll run each knife across this cutting board 100 times with 10 pounds of weight on top of the knife. After 100 passes across the cutting board, the Astercook lost a lot of sharpness with a sharpness score of 200. And the Hunter.Dual started off at 110, and after 100 passes across the cutting board, it's pretty dull at 315. And the Martha Stewart knife started off with a sharpness of 110, and it moves into the lead at 155. The McCook started off with a sharpness of 115, and it dulled quite a bit to 175. And the Cuisinart Cuisinart started off super sharp at 110 and it performed well, only dropping to 160. And the Wizeka did a great job of holding a sharp edge in the first test, and it once again performed extremely well with a sharpness of 135. And the Henchels also did a great job of holding a blade edge in the first test, and a sharpness of 150 is good enough to move into second place behind the Wizeka. And the Imarku started off with a sharpness of 115 and now it's at 165. The ZWILLING also started off at 115 and it performed about the same as the Imarku at 170. And the Japanese-made Global did the best job of holding a blade edge in the first test. And the Global only lost 10 sharpness points at 125. Very impressive. And the Yatoshi started off at 115 and did a pretty good job of holding a sharp edge at 155. A high-quality knife will hold a sharp edge after quite a bit of use, and the Global came out on top in this test, only losing 10 sharpness points. Wizeka finished in second place, only losing 20 sharpness points, and Henchels third at 35. Now that we've figured out which knives hold the sharpest edge, let's test the sharpness of the chef's knives and the Santoku knives. The chef's knife is a great tool for chopping food, especially in the hands of someone other than me who knows what they're doing. Sharpness is pretty important. And the Farberware chef's knife is very lightweight at only 136 grams, which calls into question the quality of the knife. And the Farberware is pretty dull with a sharpness score of 605. And the Astercook weighs even less than the Farberware at 124 grams. And the sharpness score of 195 is actually decent. The Hunter.Dual is also a lightweight knife at only 145 grams. And once again, the Hunter.Dual knife isn't as sharp as the Astercook at 260. The Martha Stewart knife is quite a bit heavier than the previous three brands at 203 grams. It's also the sharpest knife yet with a sharpness score of 165. The McCook weighs 177 grams. The McCook chef's knife is about the same sharpness of the paring knife at 245 sharpness points. And the Cuisinart is the heaviest knife yet at 242 grams. It's also about the same sharpness as the Cuisinart paring knife at 215. And the Wizeka is even heavier than the Cuisinart at 254 grams. And the Wizeka chef's knife is the sharpest knife yet at 130. Very impressive. And it's 203 grams for the Henchels. While not the sharpest knife in the lineup, the Henchels chef's knife is sharper than most of the other brands at 180. The Imarku weighs 199 grams. Just like the Imarku paring knife, the Imarku chef's knife isn't nearly as sharp as the Wizeka at 210. And it's 199 grams for the ZWILLING. And the German-made ZWILLING makes a very sharp paring knife, and a chef knife is even sharper at 140. And it's 177 grams for the Global. Global makes the most durable paring knife edge, and the Global just moved into second place with a sharpness of 135. And the Yatoshi weighs 175 grams. The Yatoshi knife seems very well constructed, but it's not nearly as sharp as the Global at a score of 200. So the Wizeka once again has the sharpest factory sharpened edge with a sharpness score of 130. Global is almost as sharp at 135 and ZWILLING 140. And a Santoku knife is typically a little smaller and lighter than a chef's knife, and it's pretty useful for slicing, chopping, and mincing. To do a good job, the knife needs to be very sharp. And the Farberware knives are definitely not the sharpest knives in the kitchen, once again with a score of 340. And the Astercook once again performed very well with a sharpness score of 175, which is about the same as the Astercook paring knife. And the Hunter.Dual once again struggled with sharpness with a sharpness score of 290. The Martha Stewart Santoku knife is the same sharpness as the chef's knife at 165 to move into the lead. And the McCook Santoku knife, just like their paring knife and chef's knife, has a sharpness score above 200. And the Cuisinart Santoku knife is the same sharpness as the chef's knife at 215. And the Wizeka has outperformed the less expensive paring and chef's knives, and it just moved into the lead once again with a score of 150. And the Henchels has been a consistently good performer, and once again it did better than average with a score of 170. And the Imarku's previous two knives have scored in the 200s, and the Santoku knife is at 260. We'll skip the ZWILLING since the knife set doesn't include a Santoku knife. And the Global claims to be razor sharp, and it's by far the sharpest Santoku knife yet at 125. Very impressive. And the Yatoshi knives just don't come with a super sharp factory sharpened edge with a sharpness of 265. So once again, the Global came out on top with a sharpness of 125. Wizeka once again finished in second place at 150, and Martha Stewart 165. Blade tip durability is another factor to consider. I'll drop the knives through this pipe to make sure the knives stay in a straight position, and we'll drop them from 50 inches in height. And the Farberware has really struggled throughout the showdown, but it performed exceptionally well on this test with a very small amount of damage. And the Astercook's blade tip seems to be made of relatively soft metal. And part of the blade tip broke off, and the tip of the blade is now badly bent. Just like the Astercook, the Hunter.Dual's blade tip is relatively soft. However, the Hunter.Dual experienced a little less damage than the Astercook. And the Martha Stewart knife blade seems to be thinner than the Astercook and the Hunter.Dual. And the Martha Stewart blade experienced a very bad bend. And the knife blade tip on the McCook is a little thicker than the Martha Stewart blade. However, the blade tip experienced just as much damage as the Martha Stewart knife. And the Cuisinart paring knife is heavier than all the previous paring knives. Even though there is some damage to the blade tip, it did hold up a lot better than most of the previous brands. And the Wizeka weighs even more than the Cuisinart. Even with the extra weight driving the knife hard into the metal, the Wizeka held up really well with just a small amount of damage. And the Henchels is also a very heavy knife just like the Wizeka. And the Henchels also held up really well. The Imarku is about 20% lighter than the Henchels at 74 grams, and the Imarku experienced quite a bit more damage than the heavier Wizeka and Henchels knives. The ZWILLING knife is extremely lightweight at only 48 grams, and the ZWILLING held up really well with only a small amount of damage to the tip. And the Global claims to have a Rockwell hardness of 56 to 58, and the Global made a very direct and hard hit, and the Global still held up really well. The Yatoshi also claims to have a Rockwell hardness of around 57 to 58, and the high-strength steel held up really well with only minor damage to the blade tip. Assessing knife point durability is highly subjective, but the Farberware received the best possible rating of 1. 5 additional brands received a very good rating of 1.5. Assessing knife handle comfort is highly subjective. I found the Yatoshi knife, which is in my left hand, to be the most comfortable. While the Global is a very sharp and durable knife, I found the handle to be very uncomfortable. McCook also has a comfortable handle with a rating of 1.5, and several other knives earned a rating of 2. Some of the knives claim to be dishwasher safe. So let's spray the knives with the mild rusting agent, which consists of hydrogen peroxide, vinegar, and salt. It's only been about an hour and some of the knives have already began to rust. And the very affordable Farberware's knife edge is already beginning to rust. And the sharpened blade edge on the Astercook is also rusting. And there's a small amount of rust on the Hunter.Dual's knife edge. Other than some water spots, there's no visible rust on the Martha Stewart. A small amount of rust is beginning to form on the McCook. There's also a small amount of rust that's beginning to form on the Cuisinart. A couple of rust spots are forming on the Henchels. The Wizeka seems to have a little bit less rust than the Henchels. Only a couple of areas of shallow rust on the Imarku. The ZWILLING performed very well with no visible rust. And the Global knife rusted pretty badly, but then again, the Global knives are constructed of high carbon steel and are supposed to be hand washed. Just like the Global, the Yatoshi experienced quite a bit of rusting since it's made of high carbon steel. Assessing corrosion is highly subjective, but the Martha Stewart and the ZWILLING earned the best possible rating of 1. Several of the other brands also performed very well with a rating of 1.5. So which knife set is the best? 3 of the graded areas were subjective, so I converted the scores into an A through F grading scale and did not count these areas for calculating the average finish. And the Wizeka came out on top with the best average finish of 1.8. It's a great overall set of knives. The knives are very sharp and do a pretty good job of retaining sharpness. Global finished just behind the Wizeka with an average finish of 2.2. The Global knives do a better job of staying sharp longer. The subjective factors you might consider include handle comfort and the fact that the Global knives are designed to be hand washed to avoid corrosion. If it's all about value, the Martha Stewart knives would be a great choice for around $49. They perform better than average in most categories for a below average price. In case you're wondering, I did not wear this hat during all the testing. However, I really do have a lot of fun doing these reviews. All the videos in this channel are viewer suggested, so if you have a video idea, I hope you'll take time to leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. Please take care and I look forward to next time.